Vertical integration is neither good or bad. As with most questions of strategy, it all depends upon the specific context. The value of our analysis is that we can identify the factors that determine the relative strength of the market transactions versus internalization. However, our analysis is not yet complete. We must consider some additional factors that influence the choice of vertical strategy, and in particularly the fact that vertical relationships are not limited to the simple choice of make or buy. For example, the greater the number of the firms, the less strength is vertical integration, and the greater the need of transaction-specific investments, the greater the advantages of vertical integration. Our discussion so far has compared vertical integration with arm's-length market contracts. In practice, the adjacent stages in a value chain can be linked through a variety of relationships. These relationships may be classified in relation to two characteristics. First is the extent to which the buyer and the seller commit resources to the relationship. For example, arm's length spot contracts will involve no resource commitment beyond the single deal, and the vertical integration typically involves a substantial investment. And the second one is the formality of the relationship. For instance, long-term contracts and franchises are formalized by the complex written agreements they entail. Spot contracts typically involve little or no documentation and are governed by common law. Collaborative agreements between buyers and sellers are usually informal because they are trust-based, and vertical integration allows management discretion to replace legal formality.
Different types of vertical relationships: long-term contracts, vertical partnerships, and franchising. Long-term contracts are a series of contracts over a period of time that specify the terms of sale and the responsibilities of each party. There is no need for transaction-specific investment by either party. When closer supply-customer ties are needed, particularly when one or both parties need to make transaction-specific investment, a longer-term contract can help avoid opportunism and provide the security needed to make the necessary investment. However, long-term contracts can face problems of anticipating the circumstances that may arise during the life of the contract. They can be either too restrictive or so loose that they give rise to opportunism and conflicting interpretation. Long-term contracts often include provisions for arbitration of contract disputes. Vertical partnerships. Vertical relationships based on trust and mutual understanding. The flexibility to meet changing circumstances and the incentives to avoid opportunism. They are entirely relational contracts with no written contract at all. The model for vendor partnership has been with the close collaborative relationship that many Japanese companies have with their suppliers. They also achieve close collaborations with component makers in technology, design, quality, and production scheduling. Franchising. A franchise is a contractual agreement between the owner of a business system and trademark that permits the franchise to produce and market the franchise's product or service in a specified area. Franchising brings together the brand, marketing capabilities, and the business system of the larger corporation with the entrepreneurship and local knowledge of small firms. Such companies as McDonald's, Century 21 Real Estate, Hilton's, and 7-Eleven convenience stores combine the advantages of vertical integration in terms of coordination and investment in transaction-specific assets with advantages of market contracts in terms of high-powered incentives, flexibility, and separate ownership of strategically dissimilar businesses. Choosing the optimal vertical relationships, amongst other factors, three that need to be taken into account are resources, capabilities, and strategy, allocation of risk, and incentive structures. Within the same industry, different companies will choose different vertical arrangements according to their reactive resource and capability strength and the strategies they pursue. For example, in fashion, Zara's high level of vertical integration compared to H&M's or Gap's reflects strategy based upon fast cycle new product development and tight integration between its retail stores, designers, and manufacturers. While in fast food, California-based In-N-Out Burger seeks to maintain its unique culture and distinctive business practices by directly owning and managing its restaurants. IBM EDS US Credit Card Group, Capital One, sees IT as a key source of competitive advantage, while most banks want to outsource IT. Allocation of risk. A key feature of any contract is that it terms allocate risk between the parties. How risk is shared is dependent partly on bargaining power and partly on efficiency considerations. It is the franchise's capital that is at risk, and the franchisee pays the franchisor a flat royalty based on sale revenue. In oil exploration, outsourcing agreements between the national oil companies such as PDVSA, Petronas, and Statoil and delivering and drilling companies have moved from fee-for-service contracts to risk service contracts, where the drilling companies bears much more of the risk. Incentive structures. Incentives are central to the design of vertical relationships. Weak performance incentives are a key problem of vertical integration. It seems possible that hybrid and intermediate governance modes offer the best solutions to design of incentives. Toyota, Boeing, and Mark & Spencer have relationships with their vendors that may involve formal contracts, but their essence is that they are long-term and trust-based. The key to this relationship is that the promise of a long-term, mutually beneficial relationship trumps short-term opportunism. Recent trends. The main feature of recent years has been a growing diversity of hybrid vertical relationships that have attempted to combine the flexibility and incentives of market transactions with the close collaboration provided by vertical integration. Leading models have included Toyota's supply chain, where its three tiers of suppliers, and Apple's ecosystem, in which Apple leads product development and tightly controls its intellectual property, but integrates the capabilities and innovations of a broad network of firms that include component suppliers and contract assemblers, and a developer community responsible for over 1 million applications for the OS X and iOS platforms. Although these collaborative vertical relationships are viewed as a recent phenomenon, local clusters of vertically collaborating firms have long been a feature of the European industries. In northern Italy, the localized firm networks in traditional industries such as clothing, footwear, and furniture are also apparent in new sectors such as packaging equipment and motorcycles. Collaborative vertical partnerships have encouraged the scope of outsourcing to extend from raw materials and basic components to more complex products and business services that represent whole chunks of value chain. In electronics, contract manufacturers such as Flexitron and Foxconn design and manufacture their entire product. Business services and corporate functions such as payroll, IT, training, customer service and support, and external communications are often outsourced to specialist providers.
The end.